Understanding anger, how it transforms from emotion to feeling. The idea that anger is both a feeling and an emotion comes from psychology and neuroscience research on emotions and affective states. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux in The Emotional Brain, published in 1998, distinguishes emotions from feelings, explaining that emotions are automatic, unconscious biological responses, while feelings are the conscious experience and interpretation of those emotions. For instance, when anger arises, physiological changes occur, such as increased heart rates, blood pressure, and body temperature, before we consciously recognize the emotion. Once anger is triggered as an emotional response, the brain begins to process and interpret it, transforming it into a distinct feeling. The intensity of this feeling depends on factors such as past experiences, personality, and situational context. Psychologist Paul Ekman highlights anger as a fundamental emotion with universally recognizable facial expressions. He argues that while anger arises as an automatic physiological and psychological response to perceived threats or injustices, our personal and cultural backgrounds shape how we experience and express anger. The amygdala, located in front of the hippocampus, plays a crucial role in processing emotions like anger, particularly in response to perceived threats. If not managed properly, anger can escalate into more intense emotional states like rage or resentment. In essence, anger originates as an automatic emotional reaction, but is ultimately shaped by our awareness, interpretation, and response to it. So what do people get angry about? Injustice or unfair treatment? Let's say you join a protest in front of the Capitol after the president signs an executive order that blatantly violates the Constitution, bypassing Congress to detain journalists critical of the administration. You know your rights: freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and due process. These aren't just ideals, they're constitutional guarantees. But when you speak out, the government responds with intimidation. Protesters are surveilled, organizers are arrested on flimsy charges, and federal agents show up at people's homes without warrants. You're not protesting just a policy. You're protesting a betrayal. The president swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, but instead is using power to silence opposition and bend the law to his personal will. When the highest office in the land breaks the rules, it sends a chilling message. The law only protects you when it's convenient for those in power. So how might personal attacks and insults strike at the core of a person's identity, values, or self-worth that naturally provoke anger? When someone feels disrespected, misunderstood, or unfairly judged, it triggers a defense mechanism, and anger is one of the most immediate responses. These kinds of attacks can feel like the violations of personal boundaries or dignity, making the person feel vulnerable or exposed. In response, anger often surfaces as a way to regain control, assert self-respect, or push back against the perceived threat. The deeper the wound or the closer the attacker is emotionally, the stronger the anger would be. So, what is another element of life that leads to anger? It's stress. Stress leads to anger because it activates the body's fight or flight response, flooding your system with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, which heighten emotional reactivity. This state of arousal makes a person more sensitive to perceived threats, so even small frustrations can feel overwhelming. But when stress becomes chronic stress, it impairs the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulating emotions and impulse control, making it harder to manage reactions calmly. Mental fatigue from stress also lowers patience and tolerance, reducing the ability to cope with everyday challenges. Furthermore, stress often stems from unmet needs, such as not getting enough rest, not feeling in control, not feeling respected, or lacking support. Anger emerges as an act of protest to defend oneself when those needs are unfulfilled. What about misunderstandings? How do they lead to anger? Well, misunderstandings in communication often lead to anger because they disrupt connection, trust, and the feeling of being heard or respected. People interpret messages through their own emotional filters, so a neutral comment may be taken as a criticism or judgment. When expectations aren't met, whether it's a certain tone, response, or action, frustration builds. Feeling misunderstood or invalidated can trigger anger as a defense mechanism. especially when one's self-worth feels threatened. These misunderstandings can easily snowball into an escalation loop where both parties, or all the people that are involved, react emotionally and lose sight of the original issue. Vague or indirect communication also contributes, as confusion can lead to negative assumptions and reactive anger, masking deeper feelings like hurt or insecurity.
But what about physical discomforts like hunger, fatigue, or illness that can trigger anger because it stresses both your body and mind? When you're hungry, your blood sugar drops, making it harder for your brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, which controls self-regulation, to manage emotions. Fatigue and illness also reduce your body's ability to handle stress, weakening your emotional resilience and lowering your ability to cope with frustration. Discomfort drains your internal resources. You have less patience, less focus, and less ability to respond thoughtfully. As a result, small annoyances can feel like much bigger threats when you're already stretched thin. This can make you snap more easily or feel more overwhelmed by things that normally wouldn't bother you. Physical strain also activates your body's fight or flight response. Signals from your brain get picked up by the amygdala, a part of your brain involved in emotional processing and survival instincts. When your body feels like it's under threat, even from something as simple as lack of sleep or a cold, it can lead to irritability or even aggressive reactions as a form of self-protection. In addition, discomfort often creates a sense of helplessness. When your body feels out of balance and you can't immediately fix it, it's easy to get frustrated. That frustration can turn into anger, especially if you perceive someone or something as being in your way. It's also common to experience what's called mood congruency bias, when your physical discomfort colors your interpretation of the world, making you more likely to see situations as negative and respond in kind. In short, physical and emotional systems are deeply connected. When the body is struggling, the mind follows, and anger often becomes the outlet.
So what do we do with all of this? Understanding anger means recognizing that it's not just an emotional explosion. It's a message, a signal, one that begins in the body before it ever reaches our conscious awareness. Anger doesn't begin with words or even conscious thought. It begins in the body. Long before we can name the feeling as anger, our body has already picked up on something it perceives as a threat, an injustice, or a frustration. This is where the amygdala in our brain reacts instantly, scanning for danger. If it senses something's off, maybe a harsh tone, a broken promise, or a blocked goal, it activates the sympathetic nervous system, preparing the body for a fight or flight response. Your heart rate quickens, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, blood is rerouted to your vital organs. Your body is gearing up for survival, even if the threat is just an unmet expectation or a dismissive comment. This physiological cascade happens within milliseconds. Before your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, emotional regulation, and decision-making, can even step in. That's why anger often feels so sudden, so overpowering. It's not weakness, it's wiring.
Sometimes even subtle signals like hunger, pain, or fatigue can tip your body into a reactive state. When your system is already strained, the threshold for anger lowers. You might feel snappy, irritable, or emotionally raw without even realizing your body is trying to protect you from overload. But here's the turning point. When you start to recognize these physical cues, not just the mental story of why you're angry, but what's happening in your chest, your gut, your breath, you build a bridge between unconscious reaction and conscious response. You interrupt the cycle, you reclaim agency. Understanding that anger begins in the body invites compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And instead you say, what is my body trying to tell me? That shift transforms anger from an enemy into an ally, and one that teaches you where your boundaries are, what matters to you, and where healing is needed. By observing anger without immediately reacting to it, we create space. This is space to reflect, and the space to ask yourself, why am I feeling this? And space to choose a response rather than be driven by the response itself. This is where transformation happens. It's how emotion becomes a feeling, and that feeling becomes understanding. So anger doesn't have to be destructive. It can be protective. revealing, and even healing if we approach it with curiosity instead of shame. But when we look closely, we begin to see that anger isn't just about the moment. It's about the layers underneath it. When we tend to those layers with awareness, we're not just calming our anger. We're reclaiming our peace by understanding it. And the goal isn't really to eliminate anger. It's to understand it, to own it, and to use it as a guide, and not a weapon to be channeled into something more worthwhile. Anger can also be a doorway to boundaries, healing, truth, and change. Anger is often the first sign that a boundary has been crossed, even if we didn't know one was there. When someone disrespects our time, ignores our needs, or oversteps emotionally, that tension we feel, that heat rising, that's anger letting us know this isn't right. When we listen to that signal, we gain clarity. We begin setting boundaries, not out of punishment, but from self-respect. Healthy anger says, this is where I end and you begin. And that's not selfish. It's essential for self-preservation. Healing? Underneath anger, there's often pain. A wound that hasn't been acknowledged, a need that's been dismissed. Anger may flare up, but it's usually pointing to something deeper. When we slow down and ask, where is this really coming from? We shift from blaming others to understanding ourselves. That's where healing begins, not by suppressing anger, but by honoring it as a messenger. As we unpack our anger with compassion, we untangle ourselves from past harm and begin to restore inner safety. And there's truth. Anger has a way of cutting through the noise. It can give voice to things that we've kept buried for too long, resentments, fears, or unspoken truths. When we allow ourselves to feel anger without shame, it can feel honest conversations. Sometimes it's what finally pushes us to say, this hurt me, or I need something different. Anger can help us to stop performing or people-pleasing and start telling the truth, not just to others, but to ourselves. Now, what about change? Anger is a powerful motivator for change. Whether it's a toxic relationship, an unfair workplace, a broken system, or even a self-sabotaging habit, anger lets us know what's no longer acceptable. When harnessed wisely, anger can push us toward action, leaving what no longer serves us, speaking up for what matters, or redesigning the parts of our lives that feel out of alignment. Anger doesn't have to burn everything down. It can light the way forward.